like the U.S. Constitution, assigned civil rights to individuals and limited the power of the government, thereby allowing the Nazi government to carry out the de facto abolition of all those civic rights and government limits with a veneer of legality. The goals laid out in the preamble are not law, but they still have the absolute and binding character of a law, and that binding character extends to all courts and to all government functions, privatized or not. The preamble requires that the Constitution and laws and goals of courts and government agencies are always and without exception interpreted in such a way as to contribute to the goals laid down in the preamble, including the continuation of the Constitution in perpetuity. So,
I was going to say something I forgot. And it had to do with her speech, which was very, very good. Excellent. Reminding us how powerful the Constitution is. And how we really, it's time. It's time that we put our foot down. And whether it, I think it's going to have to be both by... but it's going to have to be millions marching on Washington or down to their town square or coordinating a time where everybody just steps outside just to show them we're united. We don't have to go anywhere. Just 3 o'clock on a particular day, everybody stops and just walks outside as a protest for 5 or 10 minutes, just to show that we are united in these ideas that the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, is forever, and they will never take it from us, and learn our lesson this time that we allowed it to go too far. And I think we're also going to have to start suing. And I think once we start suing Congress and the senators, the ex-presidents individually, under the RICO statute, it's going to take notice. And they cannot, I mean, they could push a law through saying that way, you can't tag us with a RICO violation, but they can't put themselves above the law. So, I was going to say something else, but that's what came out.
'96. Eliminating sophistry, which can be used to justify the opposite of the logic.
I remember what I was going to say. Notice the parallel she's making with Nazi Germany and what's going on with our government. Well, especially in 2009, it's just gotten worse. So, she kind of put it in chronological order of how Hitler took control, and he ordered mandatory vaccines. He privatized these companies. Corporations took responsibility for certain aspects of the war, the torture, the experiments on people, and that sort of thing. And that was all privatized by corporations. Now, if you cannot see the parallel, and then the vaccine, if you're not, and the vaccines were just before the real shit hit the fan. And if you can't see that, there's really no hope for any of us. That's what I was going to say.
96. Eliminating sophistry, which can be used to justify the opposite of the logical necessity inherent in the law by playing with words and semantics or taking elements of the law out of their context. The U.S. Constitution also mandated a tripartite government, a separation of powers, and these various powers cannot be combined altogether into the administrative state, i.e., fourth branch, by an act of legislation, which detaches distinguishes the administrative states from the preamble and Constitution by virtue of logical necessity. The courts in the administrative state cannot force out the constitutional courts and replace them with the other jurisdictions, such as administrative, equity, maritime and so on. They are the custard on the apple pie of the preamble, Constitution and statutes. To use a metaphor, the custard goes on top of the apple pie. It is not served instead of the apple pie. If you go to a diner and ask for apple pie and get only custard, the diner owners would be judged in breach of duty. The existence of the various branches of administrative law, such as equity and maritime law, cannot be used as an excuse to serve the American people custard when they have asked for, and, more importantly, when they have the legal and constitutional right to apple pie. The courts and government agencies derive their authority solely from the contribution they make towards creating a balanced, just and equitable society, that is to say solely from the preamble and constitution and statutes, and their adherence to the normative justice and end goals or telos formalized in these documents. Administrative courts were also at work in Germany during the totalitarian Nazi rule after the German constitutional courts were neutralized by the dictator Adolf Hitler and his Nazi judges. However, the mere functioning of the administrative state churning out masses of regulations to create a totalitarian bureaucracy that disguised the total lawlessness during the entire existence of the Nazi rule was not enough for Nazi Germany to be spared the judgment of being a criminal state by the U.S. military tribunal at Nuremberg. For the good of the state, the Nazi legal precept was not considered to be the same as, for the good of the people. That the state itself can be found to be criminal is underlined by the judgment of the Nuremberg trials. Government bodies that subordinate their functions to a state found to be acting criminal are also to be classified as part of that criminal enterprise. The people and precepts of normative justice that serve the people must always remain primary. Under the Constitution, according to the judgment of the Nuremberg trial, a judge who in a willful interpretation of the laws fights the interests of the pharmaceutical industry or the banking industry in some corner of administrative law at the expense of the Constitution, the preamble and the people, from which that judge alone derives any legitimate authority, for whatever reason a judge might be so inclined, is also a priori exercising his office, illegally and unconstitutionally, even assuming the primacy of administrative law over the preamble and Constitution. A mass swine flu, or other pandemic flu vaccination program would still be illegal. To reframe the argument for a mass swine flu vaccination in terms of equity law, for example, a mass flu vaccine program must leave the American people in credit when it comes to their